Hello and welcome to today's Global Fleet Champions Spotlight session. Global Fleet Champions Spotlights are short, focused webinars to help anyone who employs people who drive for work to manage road risk within their organisation. Each spotlight provides in-depth insight into a particular topic relevant to your fleet safety programme. For more information, please visit globalfleetchampions.org. Today's Spotlight session is focused on using technology to manage road risk. Vehicle technologies that help improve driver and vehicle safety are evolving rapidly, and it's important that this technology is underpinned by good policy and procedures that help to manage road risk as well. At today's session, you'll find out how to identify the right solutions to help you manage road risk and how to integrate them into your risk management strategy to achieve the greatest benefits. I'm delighted that Dr. Nick Reed from Reed Mobility is joining us to present on this topic today. In a moment, a multiple choice question poll will appear on your screen so we can find out your views on this topic. It is anonymous. Simply select one answer and press submit, and we will discuss the results at the beginning of the Q&A session, which will take place at the end of today's presentation. You can put forward your questions at any time during the webinar by using the chat box on the webinar panel. The poll question will appear on your screen shortly, and the webinar will then begin. Thank you.
Hello everyone, thanks very much for joining this webinar, and thanks to Brake for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Nick Reed and I was Head of Connected and Automated Vehicle Research at TRL, the UK's Transport Research Laboratory, and then Head of Mobility R&D at Bosch, the world's largest automotive supplier. I've worked on automated vehicles for more than 10 years and led the government-funded Gateway project that trialled a range of different automated vehicles in Greenwich, including driverless shuttles, delivery vehicles, and remotely operated self-driving cars, all with real people in public environments. I now work as an independent freelance researcher on topics related to the future of mobility. I'm going to talk today about how technology is affecting road safety, but first, let's start with the vision. For several years now, so-called driverless cars have been a hot topic in the transport world. Whilst there are isolated examples of driverless cars that predated it, the trigger seems to have been the emergence of Google's self-driving car project back in 2010. Since then, there have been many exciting promises made for self-driving cars, and not just for the automation technology itself, but also the dramatic transformations in road safety, congestion, and even societal change that such vehicles may bring. The promised safety improvements stem from the statistics identifying that human error is a contributory factor in more than 90% of road collisions. Automating the driving task may address this issue. An automated vehicle will not drive when tired, drunk, or distracted, or at inappropriate speeds, all of which remain frequent causes of crashes today. Congestion may be reduced by allowing vehicles to run more closely together, and by having greater control over who is travelling and when. Potential societal benefits include lower emissions, cheaper travel, and in particular, providing new options for those with additional mobility needs, such as the elderly and the disabled. All very laudable aims. So that's the vision, but what's the reality? The first point to make, and let me be clear about this, is that there are no self-driving cars on the market today. There are vehicles available that can manage speed, lane guidance, even lane changing. There are vehicles that can complete safe parking manoeuvres without input. These are all driver assistance systems, which require a human driver to take responsibility for operation of the vehicle. They are not self-driving cars. So where are we today on the idea of cars that can truly drive for themselves? Well, the image on the screen shows the hype cycle from the research company Gartner. This tracks the maturity of emerging technologies over time, starting from an initial spark of innovation, where there is limited awareness of a new technology, through a peak of inflated expectations, when everyone gets overexcited about the potential of that technology. After getting drunk on all that visionary excitement comes the real-world hangover, otherwise known as the trough of disillusionment, when we realise all the regulatory, technical and societal constraints that will hamper our progress towards that original vision. As those concerns are gradually addressed, we ascend the slope of enlightenment, heading towards the plane of productivity, as the technology becomes an established part of industry or society. Superimposing where automated vehicles have tracked on the hype cycle over time, it is well acknowledged now that they have gone past the peak of hype. No longer do we see uncritical, starry-eyed visions of the future, where driverless cars have solved all our problems of safety, congestion, air quality, and access to mobility. More likely now is that we see stories of unexpected safety issues involving driverless cars, dire warnings about congestion caused by cheap access to automated vehicles, or manufacturers rowing back on previously bold claims about what they will deliver by an overambitious deadline. Increasingly and importantly, there is recognition that simply shifting to electric vehicles or automated vehicles will not enable us to meet our environmental targets. This will require more fundamental shifts in our use of vehicles. Perhaps the most negative coverage has been associated with the tragic deaths of Elaine Herzberg in 2018 and Joshua Brown in 2016. Herzberg was pushing her bike across a highway when she was hit by an Uber test vehicle that was operating in automated mode as part of development trials of its control systems. Joshua Brown was killed on a dual carriageway when his Tesla in autopilot mode crashed into the trailer of an articulated building across traffic. Whilst of course these collisions are terrible, it is unfair solely to blame the automation systems for the collision. In each case, the driver on board had ultimate responsibility for safe operation of the vehicle. For the Uber crash, the express task of the safety driver on board was to monitor the driving situation and respond appropriately in any situation where the car was not behaving correctly. She happened to be distracted at the time watching TV on her smartphone and made no effort to control the vehicle in time to avoid the collision. For the Tesla, all the user instructions state very clearly that the driver must remain alert and attentive at all times. In this case, the driver appeared to make no response to multiple warnings to take control of the vehicle before the crash happened. Although investigators recognise that the driver should have been paying attention, they also criticised Tesla for creating an environment in which drivers felt comfortable with how the vehicle was coping with the driving task, to the extent that they would stop paying attention. Even the fact that the system is called autopilot suggests a level of capability that is not backed up by the current state of the technology. And that raises an important point about increasingly automated vehicles. Many experts will open their presentations about how self-driving cars can solve the 90+% of collisions that have driver error as a contributory factor. I absolutely agree that they can play a huge role in this, but would also counter that although automation might remove driver error, it doesn't remove human error completely. There is still the potential for people to misuse automation systems or for programming errors to creep into computer code, each with potentially fatal consequences. While progress up the slope of enlightenment for self-driving cars may be slower than had been anticipated, we are learning where the systems that underpin this technology can make the biggest contribution to road safety and where they make the most commercial sense. What does that mean in the shorter term? Well, the rush to deliver vehicle automation is having a huge impact on the rate of progress for driver assistance technologies and on the economies of scale for the technologies that enable self-driving cars. This means that advanced safety systems will become increasingly prevalent, not just on luxury vehicles, but also on more everyday cars. On the slide, you can see a list of the advanced driver assistance systems commonly available on many cars in fleets today. In a strange way, I also believe that climate change will support the move towards automated driving and safety. The NCAP star ratings have been a huge success in delivering vehicles that protect vehicle occupants and reduce the harm to third parties in the event of a collision. Some of this success can be attributed to making vehicles that are stronger and therefore offer more protection in the event of a crash. However, this strength comes with a weight penalty. With the push towards electrified powertrains in pursuit of environmental goals, manufacturers are very conscious of anything that adds further weight to the vehicle, with diminishing returns in terms of occupant protection. The next quantum leap in safety may come from building automated vehicles that can't crash, rather than ever stronger, ever heavier vehicles that offer more protection in the event of a collision. While we await automated vehicles, one challenge for road safety is the mismatch between perceptions of vehicle capability and the reality of what is truly achievable. Because a car that feels like it does the right thing most of the time doesn't mean that it always will. But as a highly intuitive species, our brains start making assumptions very quickly about system capabilities, and so-called automation complacency can set in. As a result, we may be easily tempted by other distractions, incorrectly believing that the vehicle can manage the driving, and, as discussed, I think there is good evidence to say that this phenomenon was a key factor in the fatal crashes that resulted in the deaths of both Elaine Herzberg and Joshua Brown. Related to this topic, I want to go back to my time at TRL and talk a little about a study I led on distraction by texting whilst driving. This was in 2008, and although true smartphones were just becoming available, the phenomenon of text messaging was deeply rooted in our use of mobile phones. Having undertaken a questionnaire survey in which they found 45% of drivers admitted to texting whilst driving, the RAC Foundation wanted to find out how detrimental this activity was to safe driving behaviours. TRL's previous research had shown that talking on a mobile phone whilst driving was worse for reaction times than being at the legal limit of alcohol. This led to handheld phone use whilst driving being made illegal in 2003. By the way, the research showed that hands-free use was in fact just as bad, but that's a different story for a different day. A similar protocol was therefore used to investigate the effect of texting whilst driving. 17 participants aged 17 to 24 were tested, so all were young and very proficient at texting. And in the slide you can see the simulator that was used. It is a real car surrounded by display screens, and you use all the controls as you would in a regular car. With a motion platform and surround sound, it offers a very realistic driving experience. They have an even better one now, but at the time this was the state of the art, and allowed us to investigate risky driving situations in a safe and objective manner. In the trial, participants had to complete 2 drives, one in which they were given a set of texting tasks, and one in which they drove with no distractions, what we call the control drive, and performance was compared across those 2 drives. To my mind, the most important result was this one. It shows SDLP, the standard deviation of lateral position. This is a measure of the extent to which the driver has a tendency to drift from the centre of their lane, and this was measured through a series of sweeping bends. Matching across the same stretch of road, in the control drive, SDLP was about 25 centimetres for the undistracted drivers, but this was nearly doubled for drivers attempting to write a text at the same time, unsurprisingly suggesting significantly poorer control of the vehicle. But that's not a particularly tangible result. How does this translate into something more meaningful, like the tendency to drift out of the lane? Well, you can see on the slide that in the control drives, there were only 4 occasions when the edge of the driven vehicle drifted out of their lane, either onto the grass on the near side or into the oncoming lane on the off side, and these were observed for 3 participants. For drivers that were texting, this increased more than tenfold to 42 lane departures and was seen by more than half of the participants, a pretty horrifying result. Bringing things up to date, in January of this year, TRL produced a report for the IAM, the Institute of Advanced Motorists, where they used the same protocol to look at driver distraction by different types of interface, comparing the use of voice control and touchscreen interactions using the Android Auto and Apple CarPlay interfaces. These are becoming default features in modern vehicles. They enable drivers to use their in-vehicle screen for connectivity and entertainment, exploiting the features and functionality of their smartphones. And vehicle manufacturers recognise that these are appealing to their customers, perhaps even more so than traditional features like ride comfort or even 0 to 60 performance. The slide shows the same SDLP metric as used in my texting study, measuring lateral drift in the lane. Although they don't seem to produce graphs quite as nicely as I used to, you can see a similar pattern as before. In the control drive, SDLP is around 20 to 25 centimeters, but using the voice control and touchscreen interfaces, performance is significantly worse. Not quite as bad as when texting, but around 50% worse than when the drivers were undistracted. Perhaps even more troubling is the effect on driver reaction times. This much nicer graph compares the percentage by which reaction times were slowed by different driving impairments across multiple studies conducted using the same simulator test protocol. Now, we do need to be slightly careful in making such comparisons because the bars represent the performance by different participants in different studies. However, it's fairly clear that the Android and Apple touchscreen interfaces cause the biggest impairment to driver reaction times, each over 50% slower than an undistracted driver, and certainly worse than the effects of cannabis and alcohol at the legal limit, way over to the right of the graph. Please don't get the wrong idea. Both alcohol and cannabis cause a range of different impairments to driving that mean they are much riskier. But it is certainly eye-opening to see that on this measure of reaction time, it is these new interfaces which cause the biggest detrimental effect. So although we have a range of vehicle safety technologies coming in that reduce risk, we also see new dangers emerging caused by drivers disengaging from their responsibilities for safe control of the vehicle. What can be done? One possible route is through driver monitoring systems. The slide shows a marketing picture of Bosch's latest system. These have been developed to monitor the driver and observe whether they are showing signs of distraction or fatigue. More recently, they have been used to be able to assess whether a driver is paying sufficient attention when a vehicle is in a partially automated mode and may be required to resume control at short notice, like Tesla's autopilot. The introduction of driver monitoring systems may unlock huge benefits for road safety, not only in the prevention of collisions caused by common distractions and impairments, but also as a critical step in enabling the safe introduction of even more capable vehicle automation systems. But I have to admit, I am slightly nervous about this. We'll have to wait and see what the research shows on safety benefits, but I have multiple concerns. Firstly, about whether such monitoring systems can truly work with all the variability that they might encounter in drivers' face shape, makeup, hairstyles, hats, lighting conditions, and so on. Will they really be able to monitor drivers effectively in all conditions? And secondly, around whether drivers will truly accept being constantly monitored and the invasion of privacy that this might represent. So to conclude, there is huge potential for technology to bring genuinely life-saving technologies in the short term and long term. However, the promises that were made on automated vehicles 5 years ago have not been met, and there is still much work to do. In the meantime, we're in the situation where technology must complement and augment human drivers, both to support safer driving and to enable safer use of in-vehicle technologies. However, therein lies one of the biggest dangers that we now face: the potential for drivers to show misplaced trust in limited driver assistance systems and start to engage in other tasks in the mistaken belief that the vehicle can manage the driving. Driver monitoring systems may help overcome this issue by checking whether drivers are behaving appropriately, but, as discussed, we will need to prove that they are sufficiently effective in all conditions and that drivers accept the trade-off between safety and privacy that accompany their use. But in the meantime, until we see fully validated and certified automated vehicles, where the vehicle manufacturers have accepted liability in the event of a collision, there can be no let-up in the need for drivers to be fully alert and attentive at the wheel, despite the many temptations and distractions competing for their attention and the many pressures that we face from day to day. And one final note on technology and driving. As we're all aware, we are facing a climate crisis, and there is a responsibility on all of us to shift to lower carbon modes of transportation wherever possible. Travel apps can help us to understand whether alternative modes can help us make the same journey in a similar time, or offer us working time on the train, rather than have to be stuck behind the wheel. Similarly, the effects of COVID-19 have shown that many meetings and conferences can be fulfilled through the use of technology. So perhaps fewer car journeys will be necessary in the future, and that this results in safer roads for us all. Thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thanks very much.
That concludes the presentation section of today's webinar. We are now joined by Dr. Nick Reed to answer your questions in our live Q&A session. First, you should be allowed to see the results of today's poll on the screen. We asked whether your organisation has begun exploring whether it could benefit from introducing autonomous vehicles. 11% of our respondents said yes, 72% said no, and 17% said they do not know. Are these surprising to you that so few people are looking at the potential benefits of autonomous vehicles for their organisations, or is the fact that they're still a few years away? I mean, this is not unsurprising.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, organisations have to be pragmatic about this, and there are no automated vehicles available to purchase today. So I think it's fair enough not to consider exploring them just yet. I think it's a technology that will bring enormous value, but as I say, we're a few years away from that yet. So yeah, I wouldn't blame the 72% whatsoever for not exploring it.
Okay, we have a few questions now that we're going to put to Nick. So, do you have any advice for how fleets can most effectively integrate the sort of technologies you've spoken about into their risk management strategies?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a number of factors. So selecting vehicles that have the safety features, of course, you need to make sure that those features are included in the fleets that are being used. And choosing the ones that are proven to have a benefit. So all vehicles come with ABS and ESP now, but AEB, automatic emergency braking, and ACC, adaptive cruise control, as being features that do have that safety benefit and should be specified when vehicles are used. I think provide not just safety but also comfort benefits to drivers. I think what's also important is ensuring that drivers using those vehicles are aware of what those systems can do and also what they can't do. Making sure it's absolutely clear that you still remain fully responsible for control of the vehicle, and it can't, they can't save you in all situations. You need to be aware and attentive when you're at the wheel. The systems will help where they can, but the responsibility still lies with the driver for safe control of the vehicle.
Thank you for that. Another question now. What would an effective risk assessment look like for fleets looking to identify the sort of technologies that would most benefit their own safety?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think that comes down to that pragmatism around the systems that have been shown truly to have a benefit. So in particular, AEB, where there have been comparisons between vehicles that have that feature and those that haven't, and showing that I think is around 50% less likely to be involved in a rear end collision. So those kind of front to rear collisions where the driver should have braked and didn't. Those AEB systems can help prevent those crashes and do so with 50% less. They have those collisions 50% less frequently than those without such a system. So I think it comes down to that pragmatism around the benefits, how that would how those safety benefits would affect the types of driving undertaken by those fleets, and yeah, choosing that system as specified in the vehicles that you use.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one more question this afternoon. So do you have any thoughts quickly on how best fleets can overcome any potential driver resistance to driver monitoring systems in particular?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because those driver monitoring systems, they might be vital in enabling us to use those higher levels of automation that vehicles are starting to introduce, and helping to prevent the kind of distraction impairments that we saw in the simulator experiments. So I think they're a really valuable system, but I completely accept drivers may feel uncomfortable with having that level of surveillance on their driving. But where we've seen them being used, quite often in commercial vehicle fleets, they have met with some resistance initially, but once drivers become comfortable with them and recognize that they are there for their benefit, for their safety, and for understanding where liability sits in the event of a collision, I think that they become much more comfortable with them, and actually much prefer to have those cameras there present so that they can demonstrate that they were driving safely in the event of a collision.
Thank you very much, Nick. We're just about out of time this afternoon, so I just wanted to say a big thank you again to our speaker, Dr. Nick Reed, and thanks again to you all for attending. I hope you've enjoyed today's webinar, and it's equipped you with information you can use to work towards our shared goal of safe and healthy mobility in fleets. You can continue the discussion from today's webinar on our Global Fleet Champions LinkedIn page, and you can view our upcoming programme of events at globalfleetchampions.org. Thank you again. We hope you can join us again very soon.